because my bottom row of dentures are a little loose, so they may end up flying out at somebody, so just be prepared, all right? I changed this a little bit, all right? I changed it. Do we notice it? Do we notice the difference?
Yeah.
Truth is the truth, even if it feels like a lie. And a lie is a lie, even if it feels like the truth. Because a lot of things feel right that aren't, right? All right, give me 1 second. Just here. All right. Most of us today, if asked, do you love the Lord your God with all your heart? We would most likely nod our heads, right? Maybe even say, of course. But with this in mind, I'd like to tell you a story. There was once a young woman by the name of Sarah. She was engaged to a very kind man by the name of James. And she tells him constantly, James, you are my everything. My heart beats only for you. I love you with all my heart. And James believes her. Because the words that she said were so beautiful, they were so passionate. But then James starts to notice some things. When they're together, Sarah's eyes are constantly on her phone, where she's texting someone else and smiling at their messages. When James tries to talk and plan for their future, Sarah's mind seems to always be elsewhere, constantly talking about her other passion. And her passion was a demanding startup company that she's pouring all her energy, all her time, and all her money into. And when James wants to have a quiet evening together or just wants to talk to Sarah, Sarah usually just doesn't have the time for him. She'll be there, but she's not really there. You know what I'm saying? She ends up being exhausted from the late nights at the office, preoccupied with market trends and seeking out new investors. Her conversations with Mark consist mostly about her business. Her dreams at night are about her business. All her worries and concerns are about the business. Her greatest joys are about the business. The gifts that she buys herself all go towards things that'll help benefit her in her business. She says she loves James with all her heart. She does. She says she loves him with all her heart. But her actions prove that her true passions and desires, or her treasure, lies not with James, but with her business, her occupation. And in the same way, we often say that we love the Lord our God with all our hearts. We speak the words, we sing the hymns, we recognize the importance of this greatest, foremost commandment. But sadly, oftentimes our lives will tell a different story. If we were to have someone come here, right, and examine each and every one of our lives with a microscope, analyzing our spending habits, what we spend our time on, what we think the most about, our passions, our desires, and our ambitions in life. If they were to analyze these things in our life, what would they conclude? Based on our lives, our actions alone, what would they say is our heart's desire? Would they say, this is a person who loves God with all their heart? Or would they say, this is a person whose loyalties are divided? So I ask us the question this morning, where is your heart? And this kind of brings us to the central idea of the lesson today. It's this up here. Our actions prove what we truly desire, And what we truly desire proves who or what our heart truly belongs to. And this is what Jesus is talking about in our section of Scripture this morning. I really, really wanted to go from verses 19 to 24, but me and Dolphus were joking around. They're like, all right, we'll pack a lunch that day because you haven't been able to, you've been trying to preach for 3 weeks and we keep having snow. It's like, this is going to be a long one. So I'm like, you know what, I'll cut the verses a little. I won't go those last few verses. So today we're going to focus on verses 19 through 21. As much as I love the others. If you want to open up to your Bibles, Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21, we're going to focus on. Now, as you turn in there, just want to do a little recap. The past couple weeks, we've been looking at the meaning of the greatest commandment. We talked this morning about the Shema. And the greatest commandment is to love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Each of these components, our heart, our soul, our strength, and our mind, together signify a whole person. Right? That is what is being illustrated with this statement is love God with your entire being. But, hold on. But before we break down each of these components, we had to look at what love means. Right? So Wilson had told us that biblical love is doing what is spiritually best for someone, no matter what it costs to me, whether they deserve it or not. So how I treat them is not based upon how they treat me. And this is only with some people, right? just with some people? With everybody. That's the most difficult thing. Treating other people that we're friendly with it's easy to show love to them. But it's the people that we don't necessarily always get along with that we have a hard time being kind to. So, I'd like to describe this love. Also, I have another way to kind of describe it. This is our definition, all right? But I like to describe it like this. Selfless action prompted by selfless devotion. Right? Kind of has a little bit of a ring to it. But Wilson's is more elaborate. Because this is what we have to do. We often say, well, do they really deserve what I'm doing for them? I don't think they really deserve it. They were a jerk to me, so I'm not going to do anything for them. All right, maybe I shouldn't have given you guys two definitions. I'm sorry. All right. Now, with this understanding, right, of love, doing what is spiritually best for someone, no matter what it costs to us, whether they deserve it or not. With this understanding, we're going to look at the first of the four components that make up a whole person, which is the heart. Excuse me. And before we get into our text this morning, we have to discuss what the heart is. So we are supposed to love God with all of our heart. So don't you think it's important we know what the heart is? So first off, right off the bat, I'm going to say this. Hold on. Let's get to our spot here. Right off the bat, I'm going to say, hold on a second, I got pop-ups on my screen here. Hold on. When the scriptures talk about the heart, it's important that we know what this means. So when they talk about the heart, we are not talking about the organ that pumps blood through our body. Right? I know that's pretty simple, but that's something I want to state up front here. The state of our spiritual heart has absolutely nothing to do with the state of our physical heart. So we don't have to worry about having heart complications if we love God too intensely. All right? So We all got that? All right. So the word heart in the Greek is cardia. Cardia. Does it kind of sound familiar, like any English words we have today?
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get our word cardiac from, or cardiologist.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think of the heart, we normally think of our emotion, right? When we think of heart, we think of our emotions, what we feel. But what this is talking about is more than just our emotions. Right? When Jesus says this in Mark, when he says in Mark that we must love the Lord our God with all our hearts refer to our affections and our desires. Right? Not necessarily our feelings, but the things we seek after, the things that we desire. So, to love God with all of our heart means that all of our desires and our affections, all of our goals in life, everything we strive for is centered around what I want. Right? Right? Sounds right? All these things, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, must be centered around His purpose for us. Now, does my vision of what my life will look like, is that the same as God's for me? Not usually. Because I want a mansion, I want a nice car, all these awesome things. But that may not be God's vision, His plan, His purpose for me. So I've gotten really good at being poor, so we'll keep it that way. So, God's central purpose, when we talk about our hearts, our affections, our desires, centering on God's purpose for us, what is God's purpose for us? Isn't it? It's amazing, right? We can sum this up in 2 words. 2 words. Sanctification and discipleship. It's amazing how the world searches aimlessly to find purpose in this life. What am I supposed to be doing? But our purpose as children of God is so simple. Sanctification and discipleship. Now, regarding sanctification, the more time and energy and resources we put into reading, studying, praying, meditating, the more Christ-like we become. The more of our old self dies, right? Because we're told that we can't walk into new life with an old body. We can't walk into life with something that's supposed to be dead. So the more that we devote to Him, the more of that old selfish self dies. And now the more Christ-like we become, guess what happens to our skills of being a disciple maker? They increase as well. So the more Christ-like we become, the better disciple makers we become. How many of us believe that we are more Christ-like this year than we were last year? You don't have to raise your hands. I just want you to think about the question. How many of us believe that we are more Christ-like this year than we were last year? That sums up one part of our purpose. Here's the second. How many of us are currently discipling someone? Right, these 2 things, sanctification and discipleship, is our entire reason for life. So, how are we doing in these areas? These are the only 2 reasons we're alive. These things are our purpose in life as Christians. And it's these things, or lack thereof, that on the final day will bring Jesus to say either, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," or, "Depart from me, I never knew you." It's these things that He's called us as the Lord's church to do. It's these things that our affections and our desires must be set on in order to truly love God with all our heart. The most important commandment And the first aspect of this is setting our affections and our desires not on the things that we want, but sanctification and discipleship. You know, the characteristics of a child of God is one whose life is based on these two things. So if we, with an honest heart, one of the blessings is God is forgiving, and God will bring us from a ditch into a life that's pleasing to Him. That's the blessing. So if we, with an honest heart, analyze the fruit in our life and we recognize that either we aren't discipling anybody, or that our spiritual growth is dry and stagnant, or even non-existent, then it's quite possible that our heart is set on the wrong things. But again, here's the amazing thing. Amazing thing is that the ball is in our court. We can make the choice today to recalibrate and rededicate our hearts to God's purpose. And that starts by emptying ourselves so that we can be made full. You can't fill a cup that's already full. So again, this, like I said about you can't bring death into new life. We need to come to Him empty in order to be filled. We need to truly surrender all, like the song says. What is it that we're holding on to? And we refuse to surrender. I want you to think for a minute, what is it that's contrary to what God wants of us that we refuse to let go of? Because that is what will drag us down. So it's these things that by His grace, by His strength, by His Spirit, we can be rid of. We just have to be willing to do it. And we can often trick ourselves, right? Because we'll forge lives around what I want to do, my purpose, what I think my purpose is, around our own plan for our life. And then we'll give God the leftovers. Right? Well, I'll serve in the church if I have time. Right? God is given the scraps, not the main course. Right? We give Him the little bit off the shoulder, a little bit that's left, rather than Him being the primary goal. Right? Am I putting you guys to sleep this morning? I'm glad we don't have any tomatoes, because, you know. So we say, well, I do this, this, and this for God, and it ends up making us feel better. Not realizing that because our heart isn't with God, we've made Christianity our hobby rather than our lifestyle. When I say we, I don't mean I mean Christianity in general. The struggle that we go through, what we're dealing with. There's the tendency to make Christianity a hobby rather than a lifestyle. But Jesus tells us where our treasure is, whatever we've consciously or unconsciously prioritized and have molded our life around, is where our heart is. So if we love God with all our heart, if God is our heart's desire, then the things we seek after the most and spend the most of our time and our energy, things we spend the most of ourselves on, will be sanctification and discipleship. What's sanctification? You guys know, it's just a big word I saw, so I wanted to talk about it. I don't know what it means, I just say it. What does it mean? You guys can tell me. What does that mean? Somebody?
Holy.
Yeah, to be made holy, to grow in holiness. Because we're not meant to fit in with the crowd, are we? We're meant to be separate. And that is what this is doing. So we're made more Christ-like, and in doing so, we're being pushed further from society. But we're holding on, right? Holding on for dear life because there's things we don't want to let go of yet. Now, our job our occupation is something that I've noticed just within my first couple years in ministry is probably one of the most common idols that we have within the church today. Right? It's the thing that we spiritually struggle the most with. But if God is our treasure, then these two things, sanctification and discipleship, can still be our central focus and desire while we make a living. Guys tracking? There are some of us here this morning that I know for a fact use their job not just for income, but also as a way to shine God's light in a secular environment. Because not everyone's ministry is going to be from up here. But we each have one. So we can work a 40-hour work week and still have sanctification and discipleship as our central purpose, our focus. Has to do with where our heart is. Where is our heart? And again, this is something that we do consciously. Right? Shining God's light is the primary goal. That's what's most important. While making money is secondary. Because if God is truly first place in our heart, then we know that He'll provide what we need. We won't need to worry about finances if God is first. Because He promised. But that thought kind of brings us into our text this morning. I know that was a long introduction. But we had to cover what the heart is. Right? And the heart is my desires, my affections, my ambition in life. All right. Matthew chapter 6. Starting in verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Here's the punchline. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, is Jesus telling me that having things are bad? Is it bad to have things? Do I need to swear an oath of poverty? Some groups believe that you have to swear an oath of poverty in order to be within in ministry. And well, that's what ends up happening in a lot of cases. You don't have to swear an oath to it, that's for sure. Right? So having things aren't bad. It's not simply possessing lots of things that are bad. Because we know quite a few people in the scriptures who it says had great wealth and great possessions. The guy who bought Jesus' burial plot, he was a wealthy man. There's quite a few more, but that's a whole different lesson. So again, this is not simply possessing lots of things or money that Jesus is saying is bad, but it has to do with our heart's desire, our passions in life, our treasure. So Jesus says, do not store up for yourself treasure in heaven. Treasures on earth. That was bad. I'll say that again. Jesus says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but treasures in heaven. And this statement has less to do with the possessions and more to do with our direction. Are we investing upward or downward? Is our central focus set on heavenly things or earthly things? Are we making a life for ourselves here or there? And this idea is made pretty clear in the classic text that says, money is the root of all evil.
No.
Right? That's the text that says, money is the root of all evil. No? Come on, guys. You guys just take all the fun out of things, man. No. Let's go there. If you turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 9. actually got it right here. This is out of the English Standard Version. It says, "But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Ready? This part, reading this in the English Standard, I was like, wow. Ready? It is through this craving, this deep desire, it says, that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So we notice it's not possessing those things, it's the desire to possess those things. You can have nothing and still be what Jesus is saying is we're not supposed to be here. Yeah, I didn't say that right. But it's texts like this that make studying past the surface level of the text pay off. Right? Because sometimes our English doesn't quite transfer over. But this text talks about that craving. Right? So 1 Timothy just mentioned it's this craving that has caused some to turn away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many sorrows, some translations say. But in verse 19 in Matthew 6, back in our text today, it says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth." Well, the Greek literally means, do not treasure for yourself treasure on earth. Right? So, what does it mean to treasure something? What in your life do you treasure? Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your occupation. Maybe it's your possessions. And all of these things, by the world's standards, are acceptable. And to some of these things are even admirable. But the Lord and the Creator of the universe tells us that where our treasure is, where our utmost desires and ambitions lie, there our heart will be also. So he's telling us that our heart belongs to whatever we treasure the most. And remember, what we treasure the most isn't determined by what we say we treasure the most, but by our actions. We live in a culture today that tells us that our lives should be centered around our occupation. Does it not? The number one desire for many parents have, within the world, the number one desire that parents have for their children is that they do well in grade school. So that they can, get into a good college. And these things are just stepping stones toward what the parent truly desires for their children. That they get a good job that pays well so they can live comfortably. And that sounds admirable, doesn't it? That sounds like a good thing. But here lies the major part of the problem. We train our children to become productive citizens and members of a broken and corrupt society, rather than training them to be spiritually productive members of the Lord's church. We raise citizens rather than spiritual soldiers. That's why not many people are running to sign up today to be a minister or an elder or a pastor. Elder, pastor, same thing. We are molding productive citizens rather than productive saints. And yet we wonder why 87% of our kids leave the church after high school. We train them up to conform to a corrupt system and then are surprised when they stray from Christ. Right? This is saying something like, don't be surprised when you send your kid to Caesar and he comes back a Roman. Right? When we train our kids up with the system of this world, we are training them to have idols in their heart, to be double-hearted. And it's ideas. Hold on a second. So instead of training them from birth to become ministers, deacons, elders, teachers, missionaries, we often train them to coexist in a world and within a system that Jesus said is supposed to hate us. And it's ideas like the American dream that are partly responsible for what we see today. When you look into the generational sciences, I've talked to a few of us about this, you see these clear patterns that have developed, and you see that the American dream mindset has caused a ripple effect of materialism. And it's trickled down throughout the generations, taking many different forms. But ultimately, it results in what we see in this culture today. Generally, a self-centered people who live to work and have made their own happiness, their own success, their own comfortability, their own self-improvement, focus and center of their lives. The main goal I'm working for is that white picket fence. The main goal I'm working for are these material things, these dreams that we have for ourselves. And guess what? They're not what God has for us. Hence Paul's words in 2 Timothy 3, when he says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. Pay attention to these first two that he describes. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money. Now, those first two I'm going to emphasize. Proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good. Is he talking about the world or is he talking about the church? He's talking about the church. Do we think that we're at this point yet? What we just read in 2 Timothy? Where we've become a people who are, where is it here? Who are lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant. Do we think we've arrived? I believe so too. And it's the ideas that caused this issue or contributed to this issue that we say were the good old days. Right? Not realizing that it's the good old days that brought us to the bad old days we're in now. Right? When someone makes happiness, wealth, and self-improvement the number one priority, the world calls it ambitious. Does it not? But in the eyes of God, guess what it's called? Anybody want to guess before I pop it up on the screen? No? All right. Oh, that was Wilson, you cheater. Idolatry. What the world calls being ambitious is what God calls idolatry. And now this is kind of a sneak peek for what we're going to be talking much more about this year regarding idolatry. But our definition for it is any person, place, or thing that one has ascribed more value to than God. And again, this has nothing to do with words. This has to do with the way we act in accordance to how much God means to us. So, it's not our words. And it's idolatry that keeps us from being able to love God with all of our heart. That's why this is significant. God doesn't want to share first place in our hearts with anyone or anything. And we live in a culture today that supports the buffet style mentality. If you don't like this idea, you could trade it in for another one. We just saw this morning, well, I have my faith, you have your faith. I got my truth, you got your truth. I don't need to go to church, I'm my own church. Like, that doesn't even make sense. But that's not the case. We're not to share first place in our hearts with anyone or anything but God. So materialism, which is what's being talked about, what Jesus is saying in these verses in Matthew 6, this is the most common form of idolatry today. And it always has been. To the point where it's become a very normal and acceptable part of the thought process within the church. We want to seek treasures in heaven, but we also want to seek treasures on earth. I want both. So because we want the best of both worlds, we become what Revelation calls lukewarm. This doesn't mean when you no longer have a passion for God. This means when you mix a worldly lifestyle with a godly one. You're not hot, you're not cold, you're both, and you're lukewarm. And he says he will vomit or spit you out of his mouth. Did you see the importance of, we want both, but we have to choose one. For our souls, we have to choose one. So, what ends up happening is we end up becoming what's called double-hearted Christians, where we want Jesus as long as it doesn't interfere with my vision for my life. Right? So in our pursuit for what we want for our life, what we want for our life, we still want God. We go to service. We put money in the collection box. We do nice things. We don't use curse words. We don't party. But God's purpose for my life is secondary. Because there's something in my heart that takes priority over God. And what happens is we end up being devoted to what we desire for our life and are resentful and feel burdened by the things God wants for our life. Why? Because this should sound a little familiar. Doug read it this morning, and I'm kind of glad he did. Because we're trying to serve two masters. And this is exactly what Jesus is talking about a few verses down from our scripture this morning. In verse 24, he says, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other. Ready? Here's the part that I was talking about. Or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. See that? I'm not picking on just the idea of wealth here, because it is anything that we put in that slot. I cannot serve God and hate. I cannot serve God and material things. I cannot serve God and gossip and slander and compromise. I can't serve two masters. So insert your heart's desire here. What is your heart's desire? What is the reason you get up in the morning? What things are we choosing over God? Our primary desire, our treasure, is what our heart belongs to. And whatever our heart belongs to is our master. So I ask, where is your heart? As Christians, when we try to serve two masters, we become a church that cares more about financial income than spiritual outcome. We become a church that cares more about numerical growth than spiritual growth. We become a church that will spend time and the effort on learning how to manage our money more efficiently, but won't spend the time and effort to learn how to make disciples more efficiently. We worry about our finances because many really don't believe that God will do what he says he'll do. He says that he'll provide when we set our hearts on his purpose for our life. That links right in with loving God with all of our heart. If we do, He will provide for us. Oh, come on, Josh, be realistic. This is real life, you know. Yeah, well, was it realistic when God made manna fall from the sky to feed His people? Was it realistic when He quenched His people's thirst by making water shoot from a rock? Was it realistic when Jesus had a fish deliver a coin in its mouth to Peter so Peter could pay their taxes? That one still gets me. Was it realistic when Jesus fed 5,000 people with the amount of food that should have only fed about 7? Do we believe that when we devote ourselves to His purpose for our lives that He'll provide? Not truly believing in God's provision for us today, along with leaning on our own understanding, is why many have hearts that belong to different masters, that have hearts that treasure the material rather than the spiritual. And sadly, today we spend so much time and energy on things that ultimately will have absolutely no significance in eternity. None. Speaking of that, everybody turn to 2 Peter. We're going to end on this text this morning, because this is what it all boils down to. That's 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 10. All right, it says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be burned. Since these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn." Have any of us not read that text before? Because that's, when I first read that, I'm like, wow. Because we think of eternity as we're going to be going up to heaven. Jesus says, along with Peter, says, this earth and the heavens are going to be burned up, and He's going to bring in a new heaven and a new earth. That goes all the way back to Isaiah. It's interesting. But just think about this. Both heaven and earth will be burned up and dissolved. All those things that we worked our butt off for, burned. That nice house I finally just finished paying off, burned. That nice yacht. If anybody has a yacht and hasn't invited me, I'm really disappointed in you. That nice yacht, burned. That nice fat bank account with 401k that you've been putting money into for decades, burned. Think about all the time and the value we place on things that are worth nothing in eternity. All that time, all that effort that was focused on making a life for ourselves here on earth. An earth that's going to be burned, rather than making a future life for ourselves in eternity. How many of us want to make an impact that lasts for eternity? This one I'd like a show of hands. How many of us want our lives to make an impact and that'll last to eternity? In a good way. Yeah, yes, in a good way. In a good way. You'll know what I'm talking about here. A roof. I used to do roofing before I became a minister. A roof with architectural shingles will last about 30 years, give or take. That's supposed to. So after 30 years, it'll have to be redone. will need work. But the work that we do for the kingdom is eternal. So what I used to labor for, with blood, sweat, and tears,